Welcome to Inside the Numbers, the RockDaisy Sports Performance Podcast, where we decode the data, science, and stories powering elite athlete development. I'm Ron McKeefrey, and in every episode, I'll be diving deep with top strength conditioning coaches, sports scientists, and performance experts who are driving the game forward using tech, insight, and grit. Welcome to Inside the Numbers, presented by RockDaisy, the athlete management system that helps coaches and sports scientists turn data into winning decisions. I'm your host, Ron McKeefrey, and today I'm joined by someone I've had the privilege of working with at Fresno State. Andy Ward is the Assistant Athletic Director for Sports Performance and Head Football Strength and Conditioning Coach for the Bulldogs. If I was hiring a sports scientist, Andy would be at the top of my list. Today, we're going to dig into how he's using sports science during training camp to track player metrics, make real-time adjustments, and keep athletes healthy and performing at their best. So let's get inside the numbers with Andy Ward. All right, guys, as I mentioned in the intro, Andy is somebody I hold in really, really high regard. And not only is he a phenomenal strength and conditioning coach, but, if I was putting together the dream team for, an NFL team or any major organization, this is the guy that I would want running our sports science for sure and training our athletes, and just does a phenomenal job. But man, I appreciate you being on the show.
Well, I appreciate you having me on, Coach. I appreciate those kind words.
I want to respect your time because I know you're in training camp right now, and I want this episode to be very tactical and have everybody kind of take away something. We're going to be focusing on just sports science and monitoring during training camp, but just for everybody that's maybe just meeting you for the first time, Reader's Digest version, kind of where you've been, what you've done, and what your current role is.
Yeah. So, started down in San Diego with an internship and then got my first paid job at Sacramento State and then made my way over to Stanford. That's pretty much where I had the big bulk of my career. I was there for 6 years from 2011 to the 2016 season. When Coach Tedford came to Fresno State in 2017, he brought me over with them. And then had 1 year in Colorado, and then 2022 came back to Fresno, and fortunate enough to stay on with Coach Entz here.
Yeah, so Fresno is a place that I know well. I know it's freaking burning down right now. I still contend that even though coaching in Florida, Alabama, or wherever in the Southeast, Fresno, California is freaking Hades. That might be the hottest place on earth, and so I know you're going through it right now.
105 degrees, just walked off the practice field.
Well, man, I know, camp, this episode, I really want to focus on that. I mean, obviously you have to deal with the elements. You have to deal with the intensity of camp. You have to deal with the sheer volume of camp. What's kind of your overarching philosophy when it comes to monitoring athletes during training camp?
Yeah. I mean, I think the biggest thing, is, let's be honest, it's injury prevention. We got to keep our athletes healthy, and we got to be able to help monitor them through GPS, force plates, and then the VBT in the weight room. And then it's athletic performance second. And then right now, we're in the dog days of camp now, and it's comes into the winning edge and the mindset. So that's kind of how I kind of been approaching this camp, with those three kind of pillars: injury prevention, athletic performance, and the winning edge.
You mentioned VBT and GPS, and I think everybody's doing some version of that in some type of way. But what specific metrics are you tracking and looking at it from a daily basis when you get that GPS report, when you get that VBT report? Where's your mind going?
Yeah, let's start with GPS. We just upgraded to live, so we got a live system for just first training camp, being able to use that, and that's been huge. It's been a huge plus. Just the ability to see numbers in the moment. So obviously we're doing our daily report. With that, we're focusing on obviously your volume with total distance, your miles per hour. We're looking at high speed distance. Depending on the position, it's about 80% of their all-time high. We call them explosive movements, easy for coaches to understand, but that's your accels and decels bucket. And then sprint count, and obviously player load as well. And so that's kind of the main metrics we're looking at. And then based on that, we've been able to do acute to chronic workload ratio. And that's kind of how we're helping with the injury prevention side of things, helping manage athletes if they're turning into yellows and reds and stuff like that. The summer, I was able to kind of work backwards from some of the numbers to help prepare them. So that way, in the summer, we got up to 89% of a weekly total of week 1 of camp. And so, I felt pretty good about getting them to that point. So now we got that acute to chronic workload helping with the yellows. Then we also use that same acute to chronic number to help with the benchmarking. And that's how we're able to do it live in the moments. Let's say a receiver Receiver number one, his chronic workload for high speed distance, I think, is around 240 yards, right, per session. So now if we go 10% over that, that's kind of that cutoff where we're like, hey, he's kind of getting a little bit warm. Then we get to 20% and it's like, hey, we're shutting them down. So that's kind of INS is behind that. And we use it for kind of all the metrics, high speed distance, really high speed distance, accels, and sprint count are kind of the three main metrics we're monitoring live. We also do top ups. So every Tuesday, we're going in and all right, we post a list in the locker room. Hey, these are the guys that haven't hit 90% of their all-time max in the last 7 days. So every Tuesday we go after practice. If they don't hit it in practice, we hold them after and we get that top up in just to make sure they're hitting that 90%. There's just, the Tim Gabbett research is talking about the hamstring health and soft tissue injury risk with that 90% once a week. And then kind of from there, it just kind of turns into, your can't, coach likes to have like, okay, today was team average this versus squad average that. And we've been able to kind of manage the days and, hey, I want today to be a peak day. And then we're using the data to be able to prove that it was a peak day. Or, hey, I want this to be an unload day, or he calls them recovery days. I want this to be a recovery day. And then so we're able to kind of send out that summary on a daily basis to make sure that what he wanted is being achieved inside practice.
Yeah. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, you mentioned a lot of things there I want to kind of drill down on a little bit. I mean, first, I think it sounds like, and I know this about you, that acute to chronic is really a number that when you get that GPS report, you're probably looking at that number first. I guess explain it to everybody just in simplest form what acute to chronic is and just understanding kind of monotony. And, the other part of that equation is like, during training camp, like it's all chronic, right? Like this all, like a coach doesn't understand it any other way. And so just understanding like, hey, look, anticipating that these numbers are going to be high, but how to read that during camp as well.
Yeah, I think it helps the first week and a half of camp when you're able to kind of build them up in July at a higher rate. So we spent some extra time. We were running 6 days a week, I guess for NCAA purposes, 5 days a week, kind of getting them ready up to that number. And then when we get into that camp, that basically acute to chronic, you're looking at your 7-day average versus your 21-day average. And then that gives you a ratio. So if your 7-day average is 150 and your 21-day average is 100, that ratio is 1.5. And then, you come some of Tim Gabbett's research, you start getting into that 1.5. Now that starts putting your athletes at an injury risk. I don't like looking at player load just because time has such a dramatic impact on that. Like an hour conditioning session versus a 2-hour practice. Yeah, no, your player load's going to be up. But looking at the number of sprints, the number of accelerations, the number of decels, high speed distance, and building that acute to chronic off that has been something that we kind of focus on a little bit more.
I guess expand as well on, just because you didn't hit it there, the monotony piece and explaining that to a coach that there needs to be a little bit
of day in, day out being the same. Yeah, so monotony, yeah, definitely with the, so that's a hard one to explain to coaches. With Coach Ince, it's been nice because he's about it, man. Like we're going to go out there and we're going to be a 2-hour practice. There's going to be our run periods. There's going to be certain periods that he wants to see inside practice. And so it's certain days, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday are all the same, and that's okay. But then on Friday, we drop off. We were able to verify that drop off. And then we're able to kind of pick it back up on Saturday. So you're kind of robbing Peter to pay Paul Friday to Saturday with some of our scrimmages and some of our higher intensity practices on Saturday. So it kind of averages out. For the week, your monotony might be kind of high. But honestly, I think that's an okay thing to have, to be honest.
I always have trouble with the track mentality or this Charlie Francis high low and all the different kind of, outside people looking in and not really understanding the sport. I think it's why maybe a lot of people that come over from overseas and work in football environments struggle is because there's a certain way to play the game. And it doesn't mean that shouldn't be challenged, and it doesn't mean that, but but when you come to like how you install an offense, how you install a defense, how do you prepare a team for that? Like there's over 100 years of
down versus third
research
down
on how to do that. It doesn't mean that you can't make some modifications in there, maybe going red zone a little bit earlier in practice or something along those lines. But at the same time, like the work's the work, and you got to prepare them for that. You mentioned preparing and kind of reverse engineering that during the off season. That's something that, you really helped me with when I came out there and really understanding that. And that's something I took with me on in the rest of my career. But how do you go about reverse engineering that? Obviously you find kind of the norm from the season and you kind of go backwards, but like what, from somebody that doesn't really, that's new to this, that doesn't really understand it, like how do you go about kind of creating that? And then what kind of, is that a 2.5%? Is it a 5% decrement? How do you work backwards?
Yeah. So what we did this year is we took the data that we kind of got from spring ball practices, and then we kind of built it out by periods. And it's like, all right, our 7-on-7 period is this, our team periods look like this, and kind of looked at it from a density standpoint. And then I like looking at effort counts and stuff like that standpoint. Then Coach Ince gave me back in June, beginning of really May, he kind of gave me some practice faces on some things that we were going to be doing in camp. And so we were kind of able to kind of plug some of that data into, we use Google Suites for that kind of projection, prediction models. And then we were able, all right, this is what we think week 1 of camp is going to be. And then once we got what we thought week 1 of camp was going to be, next year we'll have real data to be able to work off of. So once we got that week 1 of camp, then we started working backwards from there. I tried to get them to 90% the week before camp. The week before that was 80%. We had a 4th of July, so we only really had 2 weeks coming off 4th of July just because of the week 0 game this year. And then prior to 4th of July, we went 80%. 70%, 60%, 50%. And so each week I'm kind of taking them up 10%. We didn't really have like our unload week in the weight room match the unload week out on the field, but the intensity of those accelerations and sprints is really what we were able to manage on that unload week. And so kind of the intensity of like, if we're getting a lot of zone 3, 4, and 5 sprint counts, well, we were making sure we were matching those inside late summer camp or inside late summer, and kind of reverse going back from there, and started with a lot of zone 3 sprints. And then, all right, our unload week, before the unload week, we worked up to a lot of zone 5s. And then that unload week, we went back down to zone 2s and 3s, kind of keeping that base in there, still keeping the count there, but just the intensity of it was lower. And then we got back from the 4th of July. And I mean, just like in the game of football, we didn't really test any of the barbell stuff. It just was like, we're getting in here, we're getting this work in. This is what the numbers we got to hit. And it just is what it is.
You mentioned, well, I think we both agree that obviously you have to have a coach buy-in really for this to work, right?
Start there.
The head coach, the staff. Inevitably, there's going to be a time where that doesn't match up, right? The coach is going to forget that he had that conversation about being able to be pulled, or it's just that we got to get a certain amount of work in. But how do you go about kind of in the moment, especially now that you got live data, communicating that when there's intensity, when there's, the player and the coach both want to go?
Yeah, we've run into, especially the first 2 weeks of camp, we ran into that a few times. It started with Coach Ince. I asked Coach Ince in the staff meeting to let me be able to speak on that and him support it. And it started there. So it started in the staff meeting. Hey, Coach Ward, what do you think we're going to do from a GPS standpoint with this new life system? I was able to speak on it. So really what we're kind of doing, talked a little bit about the 10%, 20%. And so if they get into a yellow, I go up to the coach and I give them a warning. Hey, coach, your athlete's getting a little hot right now, is what we tell them. And I've told them in the staff meeting, just because they're a yellow and they're turning into hot doesn't mean you need to shut them down. Just means you need to be aware that, hey, if they start grabbing at some muscles, if their gait starts changing when they're running, if they start cramping, maybe that's when you start to limit them. And then as they get into a red, now that's when we're coming through and we're pulling the athletes. And Coach Ince in that staff meeting said, I fully support that. If that's what we need to do to keep the team healthy, that's what we're going to do. So it kind of set that expectation on meeting 1 of training camp before we even got out to practice, that's the foundation we're going to kind of rock with. In the moment, it's been like, all right, coaches bought in. The athletes, they're out there competing. They don't want to be pulled. They want to keep going until the wheels fall off. But it's been nice when you have that support from the coaches. All right, hey, no, this is what we're doing, athlete, whatever the name is. And if coach says you're out, you're out. And it's not going to change, it's not going to change their depth chart, so to speak. Just usually it's coming down to that last team period, that last special teams period when it starts to push things over the edge. And let's be honest, that's usually when all those injuries kind of happen anyways. You either happen early in practice in Indy or late in practice as that kind of workload starts to accumulate. And so having that head coach buy-in and support and coaches listening to it has helped manage the athlete side of things.
Yeah, I think what you said there obviously is the most important piece of educating on the front end, explaining the why, kind of coming up with almost a language that you speak, whether that's he's getting hot or something along those lines that you can use in the moment. It doesn't necessarily indicate that you're pulling them out or anything, but I think the other thing there is also that kind of code word that, hot or whatever you want to use, it should trigger maybe some adjustments, right? So like, hey, look, maybe put that, that starter, that Jalen Cropper we had, or that, Roma Dunze or, Jeremy Bernard or whoever, like, let's put him to the back of the line instead of the front of the line every time. So maybe he gets one less rep or two less reps, or maybe because the position group is running hot, kind of from practice 1 to practice 2 or 3 or whatever. Maybe that becomes all yellow drills for the day and you're shortening down and they're just running the top of the route or they're doing the same things along those lines. But having that kind of language is definitely the key. You talked about, just a time that, where you've pulled an athlete or something along those lines. Like how much of that can you prevent on the front end by having those early conversations with your athletes on how to take care of their body and, do all the things they need to be doing off the field so that they can be optimal on the field and go compete for those positions?
Yeah. I mean, that's another huge component of it, with readiness and stuff like that. So we actually switched our lifting model this year to where we would lift before we go out to practice. And so when we are lifting, we're using the VBT and we're kind of able to auto-regulate that nervous system depending on what we're trying to accomplish. So if we're squatting, we're usually those first 2 weeks, I'm using I'm using bar weight with accommodating resistance. And then week 3 is when I go to straight weight. And we're kind of, all right, we want to be between 0.8, 0.9, depending on the day, depending on where I think we're at with kind of our intensities and stuff like that. And then if you're not able to hit those speeds, then let's bring the weight down so that way you can hit those speeds and get your nervous system hitting and firing. And then if you're above that, great, just write it out. Let's just keep that speed going. It means you're ready and fresh and you're ready to attack the day. We're able to get a secondary kind of measurement based on the force plate data as well. So we're doing a decent amount of hands on hips counter movement jumps right now. And they get 2 jumps. If their first 2 jumps are green, we just, all right, go back to lifting. If they jump a yellow, all right, let's hit a 3rd jump. And then usually with some cueing and intent, you can usually get them back into a green. And then if they're a red, then they do a 3rd jump. And if you can't cue them in or help motivate them back into a green, then they're coming to see me and I'm having a conversation with them. Hey, what's going on? And usually you can kind of drill down to something that, was recovery from the night before or something might be barking on them. And then now as that process is uncovered before we go out to practice, I can have conversations with those coaches, kind of battlefield conversations, with some of the coaches as you're walking out to practice. Hey, so-and-so was down on his mod RSI and eccentric duration. And so I think you might want to keep them, treat them like a yellow from a GPS standpoint.
Yeah, battlefield conversations. I like that. You actually answered my next question, which was, the cueing and the intent. And everybody's tired during camp. Nobody wants to lift. Nobody wants to jump on a force plate, but their entire body hurts. Like, I just want to get to practice. But the whole process of you taking them through, hey, look, let's do this again. But like, this is going to flag, right? If you do it again, or hey, look, like what's going on? What did you sleep last night or whatever, those types of things. But that's the process, right? Is to continue to go through that and build buy-in. And I think, you didn't mention this, but I'm sure just knowing you did it on the front end too, you're educated the athletes on the front end on why you're doing those things, which is super important. How do you prevent data overload, especially when you're tired and you've got a million things going on, and you got RSI info and counter movement jump info and GPS and all the different components of that and all the different components of VBT? Like, how do you prevent data overload to where you can make these strategic decisions right now?
That's a great question. It really, you got to create a workflow and a system, right? And it's checks and balances. And We've been using Power BI, and that's been huge for us to kind of simplify the numbers that we want to look at. And, we go in Power BI, we click on offense, it brings up player cards. And then it's like, all right, this guy's all green. And you just kind of look at it from a synopsis standpoint. Or, all right, this guy has 2 yellows and a red. And then we click on that guy's name. And now it brings up more data that we can kind of drill into a little bit deeper onto what's going on and what might be causing that yellows or reds. But really, it comes down to just trying to simplify all the data on the front end. And I like using color coding just because it makes it visually stand out versus having to look at the raw numbers of things. And all right, what was that? What was he last time? And then if I color code it, then I can drill down and really figure out what's going on. And usually you catch those things in the moment. And that's been the nice thing about catching it in the moment in the weight room pre-practice. And then in the moment live with the GPS, it's been nice to kind of catch things in the moment versus being reactive to it. But you got to create those systems and those workflows to be able to upload data real time. And then as soon as I walk off the practice field, all I do is open Power BI and here it is. Now I can see all the different colors.
Yeah. Having, again, I think what you said there about having it visually appealing and easy to, easily recognizable to your athletes and your coaches, the stoplight system always makes sense, right? No matter what. You mentioned, kind of tools, all the different tools that you're using. What are some tools and, that you feel like are emerging, and where do you think that kind of tracking's headed for, in the next 2-3 years?
It's a whole nother podcast right there. Tools that I think that are emerging, man, honestly, coach, this year I've been so focused on trying to refine our system that I've kind of haven't really tried to be open-minded about some new tools that have come out. I know there's some awesome recovery tools that I've had some conversations with some people about, but right now with where we're at and kind of where I'm at with Coach Ants and where we're at as a program, I'm trying to just build the foundation. And then really, as I kind of start going to the conferences in January or in May, that's really when I'm going to start kind of being a little more open-minded to what we can start to improve on. But coming from the previous staff to the new staff, I'm just focused on trying to build that foundation right now. Now, where do I think stuff is heading? We were kind of just talking a little bit before this. I think it's going to turn into more of a medical model, in my opinion, and it's going to fall under the medical umbrella. And you're going to start having more of those type of people that sit behind a desk, make some more decisions, and versus real time, old school, grinded out type of coaches being able to make those decisions. So hopefully I'm wrong, but I do see that potentially coming in the future.
Yeah, I think you answered my question. Even I think I think most everybody is looking at how to control those other 22 hours that you don't have the athlete, right? Whether that's some sort of recovery modality or being able to just track the stress that's on the body outside of sport, because that's the thing that's kind of always the enigma that, did this kid sleep? Did this kid go smoke his weight and body, his body weight and dope that night? Did he
just real?
What's going on with the kid? You don't always know. And, having some decisions there, but then turn around. And like you said, I think that's why it's so important for coaches, especially strength coaches that are listening to this, to really, I'm a 50-year-old dude. Like I have to understand this, even though like I remember them putting a computer lab in my college when I went to school. So like, you got to stay on top of this, or people behind the desk that don't have context are going to make those decisions, And one last question here, really, being at a Fresno State, I know the challenges, the fiscal challenges that come with being at a mid-major or just being at, just in college sports as it is right now. I think all schools are kind of facing this right now, but how do you go about, when nobody really understands the value, they never had it, maybe they've never been somewhere that did have it. Like, how do you go about gaining those resources to be able to support your athletes the way that they should be supported, but maybe there aren't the resources to be able to do it? How do you go about finding some creative solutions to fund those things?
Well, twofold on that. Number one, I think you have to show value and you have to create value and you have to educate your coaches, and not just coaches, but your admin too. Like I educate my admin supervisor, and I'm educating my admins. I'm educating the AD. You know, it's those are things that I think you have to do on a regular basis to show value and create value as to why you're doing these things and why it's important. And then, like, you know, all strength coaches want to live in a weight room, but you got to get out. Like I go to all the donor events, and I want to go to those donor events so I can create conversations with people that have resources that are able to donate money to our program. I want to get out and talk to some of these organizations like Valley Children's and Community Health and some of those kind of people out in the community that I feel like could kind of fit in our line of health and injury prevention. And you have to be able to show them what you're doing. And so I think those are really the two things that are super important: is create your own value and really be willing to go out and do the dog and pony show of creating relationships.
Yeah, you gotta paint the picture, right? You gotta show them what's possible and what you're capable of doing, and then then you go about garnering like the support, right? Whether that's donors or athletes or administration. Like you got to paint the picture first so that somebody buys in, and then you lean into that, I think. And so many people just throw their hands up and they're like, "Oh, I don't have it." Well, you got to create it.
Got to create it. If you believe in it that much and your coach values it, go create it.
Yeah. Well said. Well said. Well, man, we end with some quick hitters here. So just real quick answers. Give me a resource that you come back to time and time again.
You know what, Coach? You gave me the book, The System, and that book has been super influential on my training programs and how I go about organizing our barbell reps in the weight room. Hands down, that's my favorite book.
Give me a favorite monitoring tool that you currently use.
My favorite what?
Monitoring,
force plates. I would say force plates is my favorite.
One piece of advice to a coach starting with sports science:
don't do it unless your head coach wants to do it. If your head coach doesn't want to do it, you're wasting your time in collecting data.
What's one area of interest that you have moving forward just in your own?
I've been diving more into utilizing the 1080 sprints for non-linear stuff. That has been something that is trying to create more of the 505 and integrating it for just non-30-yard sprints.
Darcy Norman's doing some awesome stuff with that. If you haven't reached out to Darcy, you should. It's a great tool as well. But man, this has been great. It's been great catching up, and just it's easy to see. Again, I think you talk to coaches sometimes, and they can regurgitate the information maybe at a global stage. But coaches that know it like the back of their hand, like yourself, and being able to spit out real world examples and how you go about problem solving. That's the key, and you do that so well, man. Just like I said at the very beginning. So appreciate you coming on, and man, stay cool out there. All right.
I appreciate it, Coach. Thanks for having me on. It's an honor.
That's a wrap for today's episode of Inside the Numbers, presented by RockDaisy. Huge thanks to Andy Ward for sharing his insights on how sports science can help coaches get the most out of their training camp while keeping players healthy. If you enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to rate and review the podcast. It helps other coaches and sports scientists find these conversations. You can connect with Andy on Instagram at The Strength Warden or through his profile on GoBulldogs.com. To learn more about how RockDaisy can help you collect, organize, and act on athlete data, visit rockdaisy.com. And as always, you can connect with me at ronmckeefery.com or on social media at rmckeefery. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time on Inside the Numbers.